Hello everyone. In this lecture we will talk. By the end of the session you will be able to understand the reason behind cloud computing and the definition of cloud computing. You will be able to recognize whether a service is a cloud or a traditional service. You'll be able to understand different types of cloud computing. Also, we will walk you over the advantage and disadvantage of cloud computing. We will talk about some of the concerns, security concerns of cloud computing, and we will end. So before we go to the definition, I just want to tell you about cloud computing. So cloud computing is nothing but a way or approach to consume computer capacity and computer powers, different computer capacity, such as server or a software or a platform over the internet. So it's a management way, a managerial way to consume computer power and capacity over the internet. So as a definition, it's a practice of using a network of a remote server hosted on the internet. So this server could store or manage or process data over the internet remotely rather than hosting it to a local server or a personal computer. Now this is a good picture to describe cloud computing. As you can see on the circle, these are the type of IT assets, IT services that could be provided to the end user who are out of the circle, as you can see. So end user like physicians, hospitals, remote clinic, patient, home or ambulance, or even a medical equipment. These end users, they want to utilize the IT assets through the cloud computing, but they don't necessarily understand how it functions. It's all about who will provide this computing power to the end user. Now, the reason behind cloud computing is that it revolutionized the way organizations build their IT infrastructure, their IT assets. When we say infrastructures, we mean networks, servers, storage, applications, applications for building applications. So all these cloud computing, it's a word to describe a different way, as we mentioned, a different way of the approaches that organizations could take, right? Whether it's a health organization, an IT organization, an educational organization, this is another way, which is cloud computing. Again, the definition of cloud computing is a set of IT services, such as network server storage. These services provided to the customer over the internet and according to a leased base, which means that you have to pay for it as an end user, and it will give you the ability to scale up, to increase the computer capacity, and to scale down the capacity of the service. So for example, you could have a server with few clicks over the internet, to have a server with 16 gigabyte, right? And then if you want to scale it up, you can just do a couple of clicks over the internet to scale it to 32, and so on. Imagine that you will have a server like this, and it is there, like Amazon Web Services. It provides this scalability, and it's a cloud computing services platforms. This table describes the difference between the traditional way, which we call it on-premise, and the cloud computing. Now, on-premise, you have to pay a lot, we call it upfront, to acquire the IT service, whether it's an infrastructure or software and so on, right? The on-premise is less scalable compared to cloud computing, as we mentioned. You need to bring hard disks to increase the capacity of the server that you bought, right? But however, if you lease a server over the internet, you could just scale it up in few clicks, like we mentioned in the example. So it's, you pay for what you use, but you can scale it up and down very quickly. You need, of course, the spaces on premise. You don't have it, or you don't need it for cloud computing. On premise, you need a dedicated team to maintain the update or update the hardware, the softwares that are in your space. However, there's no team for you. It's all under the contract of the cloud computing services that you request. The implementation takes longer on premise, however, very rapid for cloud computing. And if you look at most of cloud computing providers, it takes them weeks to implement a huge dedicated infrastructure for mid-sized companies. Lack of flexibilities, high flexibility, of course, for cloud computing. It's flexible to request any upgrade or any custom change for your service. However, on the premise, it lacks this flexibility, as we mentioned, because you need a dedicated team for it. Of course, in terms of management, you have to manage the computer capacity when you have it on your premise. However, the cloud provider under the contract will manage the cloud service. Now, cloud computing can be software and infrastructure. It can be an application like gmail.com. Everyone in few seconds can create a Gmail account and receive this email service, right, over the internet. But you don't know where your email is stored somewhere in the world with a physical server. But you really, what matters for you as an end user is the email service that you want to consume. So it could be a software, and it can be also an IT infrastructure. Like we mentioned, you could ask Amazon Web Services to give you a live server over the internet, and you can scale it up and down the way you want it, but you have to pay for what you use on that. So this is an example of IT infrastructure. Now, generally speaking, there are three measures to recognize cloud services. The first one is the service that you consume is accessible via web browser, of course, via the internet, because you want to access it over the internet, or a web service API, application programming interface. What does that mean? It is basically a service that is ready to be consumed. This is the APIs. Now, I will give you an example. Have you ever visited, let's say, the TripAdvisor website and try to register to TripAdvisor, and the registration page asks you to register with using your Google account or using your Facebook account? What does that mean? It means that TripAdvisor is utilizing the login APIs of Google, right? So they are utilizing this service right, of Google credentials to log in to the TripAdvisor, right? So this is an example of APIs. It's basically you develop a service and you make this service consumable for other to use it. The second measure is zero money is needed for buying IT assets. They will be rented or leased. So you don't need to buy the services upfront, right? You just want to you just rent the service monthly. You subscribe to it monthly, yearly, and so on. Sometimes I see students subscribe to 4D Anatomy, right? And this is a cloud service, right? That gives you 3D anatomy models to study, to understand, right? But you have to pay for it every year or every month. And also the third measure is that you only pay for what you use, right? The more you use, the more you will pay. So sometimes you have to have a clear policy of usage for cloud services. Otherwise, you will end up with paying a lot if you don't be very careful managing the usage of cloud services. Now we have different types of cloud computing. There are types that are classified based on the way they are deployed, and there are different types of cloud and classified based on the model of the service. The first classification is the way they are deployed, right? We have public cloud, and public cloud from its name is used by the general public cloud consumers. And the cloud services providers, they will have a full ownership. They control everything, the infrastructure and everything of that service, right, of the public cloud, with its own policy, values, and profits, costing, and charging model. The great example is like Dropbox or Gmail, right? This is a public cloud deployment models. They have ownership over even maybe the server that your emails are stored, right? Also, an example is Apple Cloud or iCloud. It's a service that used by the end user general, right? Public cloud, but they have their own policy of the way they want to access your data and so on. So that's why they call it public. The second deployment model for cloud is the private, and from its name, the one who asks for this service will have ownership, control over these systems. So the cloud infrastructure is operated solely within a single organization. So the organization that requests the cloud service, whether it's infrastructure or a software or a system, they have the full control over operating and the management. And sometimes could be managed by the third party. It depends on the contract, right? Now, the third deployment model is the hybrid cloud, which combines the private cloud computing and the public cloud computing. So some organizations would like to, they have a policy that some server will be a private model because they contain a very sensitive data, for example, right? And some data or some server will be utilizing a public cloud, and because of the data policy in that organization, right? So they combine two deployment models, and they call it hybrid. We have also community cloud. Sometimes organizations, they come together, like for example, universities across the Saudi Arabia, they could come together and subscribe to a cloud provider. They call it a community cloud deployment model. They jointly construct and share the same cloud infrastructures as well as policies, because maybe they are following a governmental body such as the Ministry of Education, right? So they could share a community cloud infrastructure. All right, cloud services models comes into three categories or three flavors. The first one is known as software as a service, or SaaS. So one of the great examples for it is the Gmail, for example. Gmail allows a cloud services, which is you can access it via the web. You don't need to install Gmail. You could though, but you don't. You can consume it over the internet, right? And you will be. You could subscribe to a fee after you consume your 15 gigabyte, for example, right? So you could consume the email services using Gmail, and now you have a software as a service. The second one is PaaS, or platform as a service. So this service cloud provider, they could provide an online tools, right, that allows other companies to create applications. So it's like an environment to create application, online environment, tools to create applications. Well-known environment that provides clouds is the Google App Engine. You could subscribe to it and be able to create apps for end users to use it. The third one is infrastructure as a service, which is a model in which the cloud provider provides host servers, storage, and other visualized computer resources, and make them available to the customer over the internet. من أشهرها الأمازون Web Service, تمام, that provides a virtual server, for example, right, or a virtual machine for you. You can access it over the internet. You will have a PC, for example, just a virtual from distance, right, and then you can do whatever business you have. So this is at the level of infrastructure. All right. Now, in terms of value or visibility to the end user, so with the SaaS, as an end user, you will see only the service, the feature of the service that you consume, right? But the end user will not see the platform as a service. Only those who works on platform as a service to develop applications can see it, right? But the end user, the user who consume, the consumers, they don't see these kind of services enough. Only the developers. Also for infrastructure as a service, they don't see it. Only the network architects who can see and operate depending on the requirements of the end user. This is again more elaborate on the software as a service. It just basically refers to softwares in the cloud, software to be consumed over the internet. And it represents the capability provided to the consumers, to the cloud provider application running on a cloud infrastructure. So as we mentioned, an example is the web-based email like Gmail, right, is a SaaS service, cloud services. And the end user, they don't really manage or control any infrastructure with that service, with that software as a service, right, or any operating system. These are all for infrastructure as a service. Now, there are some characteristics for SaaS. The availability, you have to have a web browser to access any software as a service, right? But it never requires an installation. So this gives the SaaS cloud computing a good advantage, which is the availability. It is available in anywhere. You could just access your Google account in any machine in the world, and you can access your drive, right? You could access your email and so on. So it's very available when you are using cloud services. You don't need to install anything, right? Of course, it is on-demand availability. Once you have access, you should be able to go back into the software anytime from anywhere. The payment with SaaS, it depends on the usage. You will pay for what you used, basically. And for SaaS, it really now requires minimal IT demands. So right now you don't really need a training to operate or to use as an end user any software as a service product, right? Does not really require the high technical knowledge for their configurations. They always are self-explanatory with the strength of user interface or usable user interface and so on. All right, now platform as a service, it's viewed and feasible for the application developers. Again, if you remember, platform as a service is a service that provided over the internet for developers to develop applications. So these kind of tools are only feasible for application developers. So what's platform details as a service? A cloud computing model in which a third-party provider delivers hardware and software tools. These are usually needed for the application development. Also, the platform as a service provider hosts the hardware and software on its own infrastructure. So, and it depends basically on the contract, actually. So as a result, PaaS frees users from having to install in-house hardware and software to develop or run a new application. So what the advantage of having a tool that allows you to make things, to make application? The advantage is that the users only focus on their business, whatever their business is, to develop an applications for a health-oriented applications or a business-oriented applications or applications that boost their revenue for online channels. So they just focus on their business and create and run the application. And this is the beauty of having someone to do all the infrastructure work and just provide you the tools that allows you to create things. Its user is for website or software developers. Now, for infrastructure as a service, in terms of value visibility to the end user, is for the network architects. Now, network architects and infrastructure teams, they get benefit from services such as infrastructure as a service. So, for example, you could hire someone, right, a network architect, or you could hire a system admin, right, to maintain a server, right? So he could subscribe this admin server with the specific policy. He could subscribe to Amazon Web Server, right, or Amazon Web Services to get a elastic server or to get something on the cloud, to get a server running on the cloud within few clicks. So the value is really feasible for these kind of end user. All right. Again, infrastructure as a service. It's the provider supplies what we call the infrastructure, basic computing power, such as CPUs that does the computing, storage, and networking infrastructure, along with some of the tools, software tools that we call hypervisors, that allows the user to control and manage virtual machines. These machines can be monitored by these hypervisors so that they can share the computer power. User must then create virtual machines using these and monitor these virtual machines using the hypervisor software. They have to install operating systems, support application and data, and handle all of the configurations and management associated with those tasks. So this is the beauty of infrastructure. They will be giving you infrastructure of computing power as a service, as a paid service. Also the infrastructure as a service, the customer is renting computing resources rather than buying and installing them in its data center. So if you subscribe to Amazon Web Services, one of their services is that they will rent you an infrastructure, whether it's a virtual machine or a server again, or a storage, and you will be paying that monthly. So who is the user, the target user for infrastructure as a service? The IT administrators. Those are the main users for this kind of services. Now, this just to give you some of the examples for providers, software as a services or SaaS, Gmails, Facebook, all these applications that are well known for the basic end user, the consumers of the individuals who consume a technology for their daily tasks. The platform as a service, we have the Google App Engine that allows you to create apps. We have Windows Azure and Force.com platform as a service. All of these provide tools that allows application developers to create instance or artifact or applications for the basic individuals end users to consume. So it's good for a company that has a very clear business model. Infrastructure as a service, well-known provider is the AT&T, one of the well-known communication and networking company. We have also the Rackspace Cloud and Amazon Web Services. So Amazon is not just for buying and selling goods, but they also they sell actually a technology. Basically, they sell technology as a service. Now, what is the element that drives businesses for cloud? What makes cloud good for businesses? The first one is the ability to add new capabilities or capacity quickly, right? When someone provides you the three types of services that we mentioned, software as a service or platform as a service or infrastructure as a service, you will be focusing on your business, right? So you only request for any capacity, and these again will be at your fingertips, and you will ask for any capacity or capability. So this is very important for the business to grow. Increasing functionality of IT while minimizing money spent on IT assets. So one of the examples is that a company might may want to add a new business application, but it doesn't have the budget for additional hardware or software and management, or even bringing IT, right, for developing. So they could rent a cloud service from any cloud providers, and this will help them to support whatever functions in their business. So these are a summary of the advantages of cloud computing. Again, cloud computing is easy to grow your applications because you are basically buying stuff over the internet, buying technology over the internet, so you can grow depending on your strategy. The upfront cost is very low and reduced any costs for the infrastructure too, so you don't have to maintain any infrastructure or manage any infrastructure. One of the advantages that you just only pay for what you use, but of course you have to be very careful about monitoring what you use, because sometimes they charge you for the user engagement level, number of users who are engaged in that platform or that application. So this could be very costly, or could cost you a lot if you don't keep monitoring, if you don't keep tracking. Sometimes they cost you on the size that you use, right? So you have to have a clear monitoring mechanisms to monitor the cost. The overall environmental benefits, you will lower the carbon emissions because you're not hosting any carbon emission equipments on the premise, right? Everything managed under what we call SLA, or Service Level Agreement. So you have to sign, you have to read a document, the Service Level Agreement, to decide what to have on the cloud, what type of implementation of the cloud, what type of model of the cloud, what level and what service. Again, you can scale up or down at a short notice, and this is what convince most IT managers, is that it's cloud services now, they help them to respond to any business challenges or competitions in the market, so they can scale up or scale down in a very short notice. These are the disadvantages of cloud computing. So as you go, the cost will be very high, so it's higher ongoing operating costs, and it depends on the job. So that's why, again, we mentioned that you have to keep monitoring and tracking the usage of your services and how they are charging you. Also, there is a potential privacy and security risks of putting valuable data on someone else's systems, right, in on locations. So you have to be also very careful about what is your data policy when you host, or when you ask a cloud provider to host an application. So you have to know exactly what data you are hosting, and what's the risk management framework for it. So for example, you might use Dropbox to store your lectures. That's fine, but you don't use, for example, Dropbox to store your personal data, financial and bank accounts. So these are very sensitive, so you need to know exactly what data you are storing. Risk of being locked in proprietary or vendor recommended systems. So if you give everything to the cloud provider, you will be subject to be locked to that provider, to be limited to that provider, because they will tell you that we only recommend this, and you really cannot move your data from there. It will take time, so you feel yourself that you are locked, you are being locked by them. Dependencies on reliable internet connections. This is one of the disadvantages, that you need a reliable internet connections for your service. So for example, if you decide to do a telemedicine clinic, so you buy or rent some of the IT infrastructure and platforms, right, to help you perform or provide the health service as a telemedicine. You need to depend on a reliable connections, so that it can provide the service. Risk of suddenly deciding by cloud services provider to stop supporting a product or a system you have come to depend on. Sometimes these third or cloud providers, they might stop supporting any services that you depend on. And we've seen a lot on many levels, and so your business depends on a feature or a function for 10 years, 20 years, and then the cloud provider decided to just create another features and that ask you to pay more. So this is very risky for your business, right? So you need to buy their product, and so you depends on them. Greater dependencies on services provider. Of course, you have to depend on them. You give them everything to support the operation for your service that you provide, and these are the disadvantages of cloud computing. All right, now let's talk about the contract between you as end user, whether you are end user or a company. There is a contract which is called the service level agreement. This is between the customer and the cloud providers, and it states all the details a customer needs, right, to know and to be aware of the services provided by the cloud, like how it's implemented. Is it private cloud or public cloud or hybrid cloud, or is it SaaS or a platform as a service or infrastructure as a service, and how the security are handled, and so on. So this contract will describe everything, and sometimes as a company or as a client, you need someone to an IT specialist to go through these SLA. All right, with respect to security and privacy issues in cloud computing, there are many issues that we can talk about, including first, breaking into security systems. So the way now technology is consumed by a cloud computing approach actually encourages hackers to work hard to get to a collection of data for a collection of companies. So it's like a treasure for them to break into cloud computing systems. Also, hijacking of accounts. Hijacking meaning trying to get every account so that they can access data on the system in illegal way, right? Also, we have to consider the insider threats. It's possible to have insider from your organizations who might work against the policy of the organization. Malware injection is also another security threat in cloud computing. Basically, malware injections are scripts or code embedded that it looks like a legitimate, a valid instance, valid software, or a valid web service to the end user so that they can use it. However, it is a malicious code that could harm the user. Also, the abuse of cloud services. Cloud services is subject to abuse because of the expansion of that services. It make it easy for legitimate user and hackers to put and use illegal software, spread malware, and other inappropriate digital properties. Also, the nature of the application programming interfaces that enable web services is a threat to cloud security because of the way they provide, they expose the service to others. So this is one of the security concerns of cloud computing, because as a cloud provider, you will build an APIs for other companies to use your service. And this is considered a security threat because you are exposing your functionality, your data to a third party or to outsiders to use the service. Also, the denial of service attacks is one of the well-known attacks, or DDoS, or distributed denial of services, that can be targeting cloud computing companies that will affect large portion of companies that are using and benefit from the cloud. One of the security and privacy issues, the insufficient and negligent effort. So if the organization do not, or organizations don't have a clear plan for its goals and resources and policy for the cloud, this will create what we call a security gap. So they will just neglect all the services, the details on the cloud, and this might affect, or this might expose the company to a security issue. Shared vulnerabilities. Now, cloud security is a shared responsibility between the provider and the client. So this is just by itself is an issue when a security of your organization is shared by other or a third providers. And also the partnership between client and provider requires client to take preventive actions to protect their data. While major cloud providers like Dropbox, Microsoft and Google, they only have a standardized procedures to secure the security from their side. So you have to have a good contractor, someone who is really negotiate the service agreement or the contract to know every details about the security and how they are shared and how they are maintained. Data loss. Also, data on cloud services can be lost through any type of attacks, malicious attacks, or natural disaster, or data could be wiped by the service provider by accident or by any incident. Now, how cloud computing is utilized in healthcare. So the idea is that instead of having all the IT infrastructures and softwares on premise on the side of the health organizations, they can be rented from one of the cloud providers, so that the healthcare service only focus on providing healthcare and let or rent the cloud or the computing power via the cloud approach. And this will allow a better collaboration between professionals in health care organizations. It will give physicians greater reach, especially during a time of disaster. It also maintain, if you have a good contract, a better storage, and this will lower the cost. Also, you could subscribe to some of the big data analytics that provided by the cloud, and this could also help your organization, healthcare organizations, to have good insights. Also, it will improve the medical research, because you will only focus on research and medical and analytics of the health data that provided to you, and can make research, and also enable the patient or remote patient care. In other words, the telemedicine services. These are the advantage or the utilization or the utilities of cloud computing in details in healthcare. As we mentioned, better collaboration between professional and healthcare organizations. They can store and access data remotely. They are mobile, so that they really need to focus on the business, on providing health, not on maintaining in IT assets or infrastructures. They can do lots of solutions, such as remote conferencing, up to the second updates on healthcare development, and patient data, and so on. So this is a better collaboration, will improve the healthcare sector. Of course, again, greater reach, especially during time of disaster. You could have real-time guidance. A doctor who's on site with very little experience can communicate with someone with lots of expertise, right, to perform, for example, a field surgery, and so on. So this will enable health professionals to consult with one another and send requests for additional resources or manpower. So it's a greater reach when we utilize cloud services. Better storage, lower cost. Hospitals can access the kind of information they need to offer and to focus on the best care, without the price tag, as we mentioned, without the price that they could put them under the force them to make cut where cut shouldn't be made. So big data is another buzzword, and because of the proliferation of computers and computer generated data, big data allows doctors to narrow down the conditions of patients, comparing them to others, to deliver a more focused and accurate assessment on their alignment. So the big data, as a definition, is a terminology that describes large volume of data, and these data include structured and unstructured data. Structured data, an example for it, is the data that has a clear fields to be captured, clear defined structure or defined scheme. However, unstructured data, they are unclear. For example, the prescriptions, the written prescriptions by the handwriting doctors, these are unstructured data. Images are unstructured data, but with the help of technology, we make them more structured so that we can get insights out of these type of data. That floods a business. The big data floods the business nowadays on day-to-day basis. So the cloud computing, it possible via storing and sharing data to speed up the research process. So you'll have the ability as a doctor, as a physician, as a healthcare professionals, to gather outside data from multiple feeds. You do data analysis and use the cloud to pull the data and condense it into a better results, into a better research. Of course, you can remotely take care of the patients, electronic visits, consultations, and so on. So cloud services also, now there are companies that are very focused on providing a healthcare based cloud solutions.